another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where mental health professionals talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate mental wellness while working in the mental health field while the world is on fire. It's a fun time. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher, licensed marriage and family therapist, irritated human, therapy consumer myself. This week we are back with another solo episode. The world's on fire, and it's hard to get guests lined up. I could have not taken a month off from lining guests up, but here we are. I took the whole month of December off of having guests and also planning guests. So, there's a lag. It's fine. Those of you who are watching on YouTube will notice I'm not using my green screen. I'm in my basement. We got carpeting. Hooray! The Midwest got hit by some real bad flooding last summer, and our sump pump went out. And so we had some groundwater, and we had to get rid of all our carpeting and most of our furniture and just a lot of stuff. And we've had sort of an empty, very echoey basement for a long time. It is very plushly carpeted right now. We painted. So, that's the stress going on in my personal life. Actually, it's nice. This isn't going to be the normal setup. We'll get the cool posters, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars stuff back up on the walls. But as with most things with living in a space, it is an ongoing process. So I can't complain too much as a millennial who owns a home. So, work in progress. Speaking of works in progress, America might be a social experiment that has run its course. Today, we're going to talk about why America loves to protect pedophiles. And it's a frustrating topic to talk about. It's not a hard topic to sort of detangle. America was settled on colonial ideology, which protects power above all else and requires in-groups and out-groups in order to function. And why that works really well with the church, which is set up on power dynamics, which require an in-group and out-group in order to function. For those of you who are new, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Yes, true. And I also work with religious trauma. And so the American politicians, powerful elites named in the Epstein files that QAnon voted for, is again like this sort of clunky, paradoxical topic to look at. But if we zoom way out and look at what colonizing behavior looks like, what we look at as religious institutions claiming moral high ground while not actually acting in particularly moral ways, we see this theme of power protects itself and never the victims. And so what does this all have to do with the current moment? Well, the Epstein files, but two, the Super Bowl's coming up, and I was just sort of reflecting on Kendrick Lamar's song, Not Like Us, was a cultural moment. And Drake still tours and records and is just like a regular dude, even though we saw him try and make out with an underage girl on stage from like a lot of different cameras, And so when we have a colleague of his, when we have somebody who knows him and knows how he acts behind the scenes, calling him an outright pedophile, you would think something would change. And so what's the difference between then a cultural moment and sort of a structural moment? And I think, unfortunately, that's also going to be what happens with Epstein files. I would love to be pleasantly surprised that there's actual real accountability. But again, the difference between a cultural moment and a structural moment is a structural moment takes what is this momentum in this moment in time in history and makes changes to the way that we as a society organize ourselves, in the way that the hierarchies, and again, like it'd be great to do away with hierarchies, but the way that our power structures sort of work is that, an inverted pyramid where all the regular folks are on the top, and it, they control the power because, they are the masses that move things and they outnumber everyone else? Or is it sort of a regular pyramid where very few at the top and everything else trickles down, except it doesn't, obviously. It's a poor turn of phrase on my account. I don't mean to make this an economics lesson, but obviously trickle down economics never worked. And so, America's sort of always been the pyramid shape of power, which is hierarchical, generally speaking, not generally speaking, since the founding of the United States of America, the country has been patriarchal. Before that, indigenous cultures had a lot of matriarchal leadership and a lot more based on mutual aid and working together than we did with consumer capitalism. And again, just as much as I like to complain about capitalism, really it's a colonial mindset. And the colonial mindset is deeply tied to the church because the church was the moral reasoning behind the colonial project, which was, in the 1400s, after warring across their own continent for a millennia, the church was like, hey, let's spread out. And if you find anyone who's not a Christian, you get to take their land because only Christians get to have land. And again, that tracks pretty easily then to the founding fathers deciding that only landowners get to vote. And that leads us to a plethora of our current problems. So, I like to talk about Kendrick Lamar. I like hip hop, and I like especially like Killer Mike, LP, Run the Jewels. I like things that run in triplets, and so I always sort of try and find three things. We have like QAnon, Donald Trump, well, QAnon, Epstein Files, and Kendrick Lamar. That's not as catchy. Last week, I stumbled into all the terrible people I talked about were from Wisconsin. But I think each of these instances are sort of fascinating, where we have like what's going on right now. We have what's going on, what happened like a year ago with this cultural phenomenon, Not Like Us. And then, what's been going on in the past decade with the QAnon movement. And then what's going on for the past millennia. Look, I have a quad instead of a triplet. We got four things. In settler colonialism, and why that, again, doesn't ever protect victims, but protects power. So the Epstein Files have named Donald Trump thousands of times, right? He's in them. He's pictured in them. He's listed as being compromised by Epstein, by Israel. These are things that, again, and what's been released for the files has been pretty actively scrubbed. And this is what they're willing to release. And it's all pretty bad, right? Like, it's shocking to me to look at something like QAnon and the Pizzagate, especially because, again, it was sort of like conspiratorial online thinking, rebranding what was the Satanic Panic of, their kid preschoolers are satanic leaders and they're sacrificing children and eating them in the classrooms across America. We need to stop Satanists and protect Jesus. And that was like predominantly a hoax. The Satanic Panic, as understood by like Oprah and mainstream media, the nightly news in the 90s, was not based on anything. And QAnon sort of ran with it and said, oh, but it's the shadowy group of elites, particularly the Democrats, lols. And Donald Trump is the one who will expose them. Now, before 2016, Donald Trump had credibly been accused of sexual misconduct, of rape, of raping E. Jean Carroll, which he was found guilty of. His first wife, who fell down a flight of stairs conveniently and is buried under one of his golf courses, is accused him of rape after she made fun of one of his hair implants. And he himself has outed himself as being somebody who is a serial sexual harasser of you can grab them by the pussy, and when you're a celebrity, they let you, of going into underage dressing rooms for his teenage pageants that he ran. These are things that he was so comfortable saying. He said them publicly. So, this is not even getting into any of the conspiratorial stuff. This isn't even getting into real deep in the Epstein files. And he partied with Epstein. He was good friends with Epstein. They had they were neighbors in New York and they were neighbors in Florida. And Trump said Epstein was a good dude. He likes women even younger than I do. Ugh, creepy. So again, like this stuff was all known before the election. And so the idea that there were people who lived online and really loved to follow the Q stuff, the QAnon stuff, which was just like, again, Q finally got exposed and nothing happened because of it. Cause it's just like a random dude who didn't have any insider information, wasn't a government official, wasn't anything. It's just like a dude being conspiratorial on the internet. And so again, I mean, the Pizzagate part of QAnon believed that there was a shadowy cabal of satanic Democrats who ate children, and the way that they would participate in these cannibalistic rituals was to order pizza from this pizza place in, I think, like New York, upstate New York. I don't remember. Pennsylvania, somewhere on the East Coast. The details don't matter because it wasn't real and it was made up. And so again, I mean, we know from victim advocacy, we know from protecting people who have been trafficked, we know from working with survivors of sexual assault, the we here being the field of psychology. We know that there are people who get trafficked. We know that people who get trafficked often are at risk for various factors in their life, make them more likely to be trafficked or not. And we also know that the most likely person to start someone in trafficking and to abuse someone is someone they already know, right? It's not the shadowy cabal of people who are being kidnapped off the street. It's often a parent, an adoptive parent, a relative of some sort, your scout leader, your pastor or preacher. It's often people who have access to the family. Predators are attracted to families that have some sort of risk factors going into it, whether it's socioeconomic or it's life transitions, just moved to town, spouse died, recent divorce, etc. Sort of these life transitions that make people vulnerable. And that's where predators are attracted. So predators have always been drawn to the church because the church protects predators and not victims. And you get a ton of access to children. Scout Leaders of America, Boy Scouts of America, deeply funded by the Mormon Church. Predators were attracted to this because, again, tons of access to kids. You get to take them out for like weekend camping trips. Scouts is maybe the only counterexample I can really think of off the top of my head where what used to be a pretty powerful cultural phenomenon has really fallen after the abuse came to light. And I think it's simply just because the Scouts had to pay out a ton of money. And unlike the various religious institutions that have abused people at just as high, if not higher of a rate, they didn't have the deep pockets to be able to come back from that. And I think culturally, you know, millennials, Gen Z, even younger Gen X are less likely to just like send our kids off, right? Like, um, I take our boys to swim lessons and we stay and watch the swim lesson. Not because we like think the coach is gonna like do something inappropriate in the pool. Not that you can't rule that out. I don't know the abuse statistics of swim. But both my wife and I play volleyball, and coming from the volleyball world, like a ton of volleyball coaches are either assholes or creepers. Like this is a well-known thing that you get a bunch of teenage girls in tight-fitting uniforms, and some predators are gonna find their way to that environment because they're creeps. And you have to be vigilant. You have to work towards holding people accountable and kicking people out of these spaces when they're not doing good things. But it's probably, you know, I don't know. I don't have statistics on it. I will say where I was coaching and when I was coaching, there were a handful of known individuals that had never had charges pressed against them, but it was really strongly recommended to not send your daughters to play for them. And again, that's community action, and that's the community coming together and looking out for each other and saying, "Hey, not great." And again, some of those, I'll get to this point later, but I'll make it right now. Like why some of that happens is because people don't press charges, because victims in America aren't believed. And there comes a lot of social pressure again to protect the institution. And so if you're working, you know, I was when I coached club, it was, Badger Region Volleyball Association. And like they had some conversation around reporting, but I remember I'm a therapist, so I stand up at one of the coaches' trainings and talk about being a mandated reporter and how you can make anonymous reports when you're concerned that a kid's been abused, or that a kid's being maltreated or neglected in some way. And like even the people who were doing the coaches training, like just faces turned white, all the blood drains out of their face, very uncomfortable talking about this stuff. So again, not only is it really hard on the victim, but anybody who's supporting the victim, the institution protects itself. And so there's always pressure against that. So it's really hard to, without structural change, without a system that supports victims and holds abusers accountable, it's really hard to make much progress in this because there's so much pressure that the institution exerts to protect itself. Now, Badger Region Volleyball is not a bad institution, as far as I'm aware. There's not widespread abuse. It's something where, like, yeah, sports culture, predators will find their way to that because it gives them ample access to children. And so the community of those sports programs need to work to advocate and protect victims and keep those people away from kids. Doing things like background checks are now the norm. That was not always the case. And doing that due diligence to make it more difficult for predators to get access to kids and to weed out people who might have those issues. And again, it's still just really hard to get those people fully away from the environment, to keep them out of the environment, even when charges get pressed, even when some of this stuff happens. Like if they can pass a background check, they're usually going to be able to get some access to a vulnerable population, generally minors, right? And so it's just one of those things where that's a small, like, real life example where we're talking about like the big number statistics of like the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, Boy Scouts of America. Like these are gigantic institutions that have also participated in massive, massive, massive abuse scandals. And so you have something like QAnon saying shadowy government figures, satanic ritual, and it's like, well, opposite of Satan. I distracted myself with the joke in my head that I was raised Lutheran, so I was taught that the Pope is the Antichrist. But not Team Satan would generally be the Christians, and who's most likely to abuse children? Not the Satanists that you don't know and think are ordering pizza to eat children, but far more likely your local religious leader, right? And statistically speaking, clergy, religious leaders are the number one profession most likely to abuse children. Things that are most likely to abuse children are a family member, number one, and then clergy. And it's not a large enough number to count for statistical significance, but then it would be Republican politician. And so again, this is just like a brain drain in America that people are so bad at statistics that, like, Trump was telling people to vote for Roy Moore, and he's a sex offender. So just this idea of like what I think QAnon did that was really damaging was propagate this idea that it's the shadowy cabal of well-organized people. What was that shitty movie that came out a few years ago? It was about like trafficking ring, and this guy like went and did a John Wick and saved the children, and like that's not at all how it ever works, right? So QAnon really ran with that. And again, I think it's convenient for the institutions, and I think the institutions let stuff like that slide because it protects the institution. Very few religious people spoke out against Donald Trump. Now, you can go and say, Jeremy, I found this article and this article and this article, and this bishop did this, and this person did this. And 90% of evangelicals voted for Trump, right? It dipped a bit, right? 90% of white males who are identified as Christian were voting for Donald Trump. Like that was his voter base. And I was raised evangelical. And so I know that the church's stance, the institution's stance, is to not talk politics from the pulpit. In theory, that used to be illegal. It's not anymore. Not that it was ever enforced, right? You weren't allowed to talk politics, to promote a candidate from the pulpit. And that's been overturned. That's been a thing that Trump did to reward the church for voting for him, but also was a thing that the IRS did not really pursue or follow with anything. So this has been happening for a long time. And again, MAGA is an evangelical movement. It is the idea of the religious right and the political right working towards common goals, which are protecting their power of white supremacy. Uh, and so, fast forward to the present day, again, we have Trump all over the Epstein files. For anyone who's been paying attention to Trump ever, not a surprise, right? Like, we knew he was in there. We knew he was buds. He said he was buds. Like, his own words indict him that he's been involved. I think what people are struggling to sort of understand in all of this is we have the Epstein files, we being America, the United States of America. The FBI has had them. Other people probably have them too, right? Like the compromised nature of a lot of politicians is probably pretty high. And so I think we love shows like House of Cards. Whoops a daisy, another high-powered person who's sexual abuser. But we love that idea of politics being dark and shadowy and like blackmail, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, that probably is true. And with the wealth inequality we have in our country right now, it's really hard to have any accountability. Matt Gaetz was sexually trafficking underage girls and gets to still be like a talking head on Fox News from time to time, or have his podcast, or I don't know what Matt Gaetz is doing, but he didn't go to prison and didn't face any accountability, even if his political career floundered. Roy Moore, as far as I know, I'm going to double check that. He might have actually had to face some consequences. But again, like late in life, again, policing a priest who abused people for 30 years and now is in the 70s or 80s, and you're going to put him in jail. It's like, that's great. There's some accountability, but there's hundreds to thousands of people who were abused in that time frame. And these institutions don't make any sort of structural change, right? The church spends millions, potentially billions with a B, of dollars to lobby against victim advocacy groups, to lobby against eliminating statute of limitation laws, to lobby against having payouts, to lobby for being able to split their money up so that a congregation, or I want to say precinct, but that's obviously the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for? An archdiocese, a group of churches, a geographic location can be limited in how much money they can pay out to victims, when the Catholic Church has, again, billions with a B, potentially trillions with a T amount of money in assets and land and all these things that they've accumulated, right? Like, I think the Vatican itself has billions of dollars in assets, let alone what the church, the Catholic Church itself, has across. The Mormon Church is the second largest landowner in America. The first is like a logging company, which probably not great. But the Mormon Church, right? The Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, is the second largest landowner in this country, worth $300 billion. And, they're spending millions of dollars to advocate against victims, to protect the perpetrators. And we know this, right? This stuff is documented. It comes out in court cases. When there is some accountability, we get small glimmers of how much worse it really is that the churches knew these things. I was raised Lutheran. I was raised Wells. Well, the Wells Church, tiny little church, right? You've probably never heard of it, unless you happen to be in Wisconsin or Michigan or Minnesota, but probably just in Wisconsin. Small church. We had 3 religious leaders arrested in 3 months, like 3 months in a row last year. One of those, peeking behind the curtains, was definitely known about for a long time before there was any sort of real accountability. And so, again, what does the church do? This is a small, tiny church. It goes through their website. It deletes every mention of them. It keeps active moderation on all their comments to eliminate any conversation around these things. And what does the institution do? Well, there's an ongoing investigation, right? And so we're not interested in structural accountability. this person might face accountability, but we're not going to change anything, and we're going to protect the institution. And this is what happens small scale or big scale. And so again, this is where I move into the sort of Kendrick Lamar example of, here's somebody in the community, the hip hop community, the Black community, saying, hey, we got a problem, right? And like pitch perfect, right? That was, I hate reaction videos on the internet because it's just the newest edition of reality TV. It's not real. They're not listening for the first time. They're pretending, and it makes your mirror neurons happy, right? Like watching somebody else get excited about something that excites you makes our brains happy, and they're just manipulating that. But I hate reaction videos. The only time I think maybe some of the reaction videos we got were legitimate were that Kendrick and Drake beef, because Kendrick released so many songs so fast and hilariously called out point by point what he thought Drake was going to do. Right. So, he said, you're going to come after my family. You're going to say that I was abused because you listened to Mr. Morale, but you didn't understand it. Like, it was wonderful. And again, the disappointment in it all is, even when somebody within the community, somebody with expertise, knowledge, who regularly is an important part of that community, calls someone out, there's no real accountability. And so, Drake continues to tour, Drake continues to record, he gets featured on other people's songs and albums, and like nothing happened, which shouldn't be a surprise, other than it was a big deal that Kendrick was speaking out about it, because Kendrick is such a big figure, particularly in the hip hop community. And so we don't really have stuff like that, right? The Pope is a big figure in the religious community, and he speaks out against abuse, but never in a structural way, right? In a, the church, these people need to be better. We need to do better about vetting people before they become priests. But it's never like, I support the victims. It's never, we're going to donate money towards these causes. We're going to make these structural changes. It's, we wrote a new document that says trans people are sinful, right? Like, don't get IVF, right? Like, the church is still fighting cultural wars from 50 years ago for some reason. And again, not protecting victims, protecting perpetrators. So it's Kendrick was rare in that it was a big figure within that community speaking out against it, and then nothing happened, right? and so he was talking about structural change. He was talking about like, hey, this whole group is rotten, and anybody who works with them is rotten, and I'm not working with them because they're gross, and like, you shouldn't either. And for a minute, it seemed like it might matter, and that Drake's career might be severely hampered. There's always the Right Wing podcast tour. If you've been credibly accused of sexual assault, you can find Jesus and get hired over there, Russell Brand style. But the idea that there would be some actual accountability just like didn't happen. Also kind of a bummer that Kendrick didn't say certified president, certified pedophile at the Super Bowl last year. I get that his hatred for Drake was stronger than his hatred for Donald Trump, but really could have been a cultural moment. But again, my whole point here is the cultural moments don't create enough momentum to create structural change, right? And we're watching protests happen, and we're watching a general strike try and get organized. And we know from organizing work that about 3% of the population at large needs to participate in these actions for there to be some change that comes out of it. Structural change, not just a cultural moment. And so it's not a huge percentage of the population that needs to mobilize and get involved in these things. And the percentage of the population that wants to mobilize around victims of sexual abuse is incredibly small, because it makes us feel yucky. It makes us feel bad. We don't like to think about it. We certainly don't want to have to confront it head on. We don't want to be exposed to it. We would prefer to not know. And again, that's what makes the structure, the institution, really easy to protect itself. And so someone like Donald Trump can say, I'm going to release the Epstein files. And anybody who knows Donald Trump is like, well, he lies about everything, so that's not true. And the people who have been like lapping up this idea of there's some shadowy group that's been doing this are super interested in that, right? Mike Johnson trotted out the lie earlier this year that Trump's always been an FBI informant, and that's why he was so close to Epstein. And they backed off on that right away because A, there's no evidence of that, and B, there's a ton of evidence that Trump was involved in getting Epstein girls. Like, again, the Melania movie just came out. Oh, I don't know. I didn't see it. I wonder how he and Melania, I wonder how Trump and Melania got together. Oh, that's right, Jeffrey Epstein. So again, like, they're just intrinsically tied. The greatest pedophile of our cultural time that we know about, who was convicted of trafficking and then got a sweetheart deal from somebody who's now in Trump's cabinet. Like, again, it's so preposterous that these conspiratorial thinkers have this overwhelming evidence in their face, and because it makes them feel bad about their lack of intelligence and or that they picked the wrong guy, they can't see it or refuse to see it. It's frustrating on an individual level, but again, zooming out on an institutional level, yeah, power protects power, and so the rich and famous pedophiles are unlikely to face any sort of actual accountability because the powerful are going to protect themselves. Whether it would have been Clinton or Clinton or Trump in 2016, both of them were probably compromised. This is where I do get a little conspiratorial. Both of them were probably compromised in the sense that, like, yeah, Bill Clinton went to the island too. And a lot of people who are in the Epstein files are going to be named and listed who didn't, who were unlikely to have raped children. And the people who show up over and over and over again, the proximity you have with him, the more likely you are to involved in that. If you're using the same lawyers and you're buying the same properties and you live next to each other in multiple states, not great. Sort of like Diddy and like the freak offs, is like Diddy had white parties, which were, everybody wore white and they were socialites, and lots of big figures, lots of celebrities went to them because it was a big deal in the community that they were in to go to a party like that. That is where connections got made, and that was where networking happens. And so there was a difference between the clientele of Diddy's freak offs, where there was a ton of sexual abuse and trafficking that happened, and the white parties. And I think that's probably true of Epstein too. Again, I think if you owned teenage beauty pageants and, messaged Epstein back and forth about the girls who were in the pageants, and you were in the habit of getting people visas that they didn't earn or deserve because they were attractive, that, like, that's a lot more of a smoking gun than being in a picture with Diddy ever was. Um, so again, I mean, the cognitive dissonance is really strong, but the institution, the powers that be, are going to protect, which is why different groups, different parties in America have had this information and not done anything with it, because America doesn't go after pedophiles, right? We love the idea of the lone wolf. We love the idea of criminals being a bad apple because we're so culturally numb and or uneducated that we forgot that a bad apple spoils the whole bunch. It's the whole phrase there, the basic common sense wisdom is that, like, yeah, you can't have a bad apple because it ruins everything for everyone. You got to get rid of the bad apple, and everything else that's been spoiled by that bad apple, because that's what bad apples do. So whether it's Democrat, Republican, and again, overwhelming Republican, you can go online, and how many Republican politicians have been caught in some sort of underage sex scandal? It's a tremendous amount. It's, again, deeply concerning, and we have smaller examples where, and it doesn't matter. It should. It does. It's pretty much universally understood that, like, people who rape children are loathed, and on a case by case basis under a microscope that might be true, but when we zoom out and use the telescope, no, powerful people abuse lots of different groups, not just children, and they get away with it because power protects power. And so Michael Jackson still gets played on the radio and people still listen to him, and they might be like, ooh, yucky, he was kind of creepy, but they'll still listen to him. I don't know that I saw a single Halloween list, even, last year, that didn't have Thriller on it. So again, there's a yuckiness to it in concept, and then there's a real aversion to doing anything with it in reality. And so, I think Michael Jackson's his standing in like sort of legendary status, I think will continue to dip over time. He will forever be considered a weirdo creep at the best, and an outright pedophile at the worst. And so I think that will continue to dip, but like not like R. Kelly, who actually went to prison, right? Um, I think for people who grew up in the 80s, Michael Jackson will always hold like an important part in their cultural experience. So again, it's that inability to like have accountability. And I'm not saying like you should stop listening to Michael Jackson because he's a pedophile and that would solve everything. Again, this is about structural change and not individual change. I think you should not listen to Michael Jackson because he's a pedophile. And I don't really care if you do or not, because most of our celebrities, most people that we like and put on pedestals in our culture are bad in some way or another. Um, don't meet your heroes. I mean, we're really holding on to like what, Dolly and Keanu Reeves? Is that all we have left right now? So yeah, I mean, powerful people are probably not good. And again, the idea that people are all good or all bad is preposterous. And with that understanding that most people or all people have things that are lovely about them and things that make them truly horrific, we need structures, we need curbs, we need rules and regulations that limit how much harm a powerful person can do. And again, America is always been against that idea. We were built on the idea that the powerful can do what they want because that makes them more powerful and that makes them richer. Again, we've updated what started as, hey, go conquer in the name of the Lord, to go conquer in the name of capitalism, to sure, your weird AI can create a ton of child sexual assault material. Um, that's Grok for those of you who missed that reference. And hey, happy clapping. Maybe Elon is going to face some accountability for that. Not in America, because again, apparently we don't like immigrants. I'm being sarcastic here. Obviously, I love and support immigrants and think freedom of movement is a human right. But as a country, an administration, a regime that is so violently opposed to immigrants, sure took a lot of money from a white immigrant to be able to do their darndest to rig various elections. So, you know, the hypocrisy knows no bounds. These aren't fun topics to talk about. Even people who are like advocate for this stuff and are outspoken on it, like Ashton Kutcher, was a big name for a long time in speaking out against child sex trafficking and supporting victims. And then when his buddy, the frizzy haired guy from that 70s show, Danny Masterson, that's not right. Is it? This is terrible media. I'm just looking it up right now. It is Danny Masterson. That's a deep pull. I never watched that 70s show. Set in Wisconsin, but not filmed here. So fuck it. When the sex abuse stuff came to light and Danny Masterson was on trial, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, who had been big figures in the advocacy, protecting children and speaking out against sex trafficking, defended Danny Masterson. They went and gave testimony in favor of him, saying he was a good dude. Because again, when we're confronted with this stuff, we tend to not want to. Somebody who's well educated on the topic and somebody who should have known better, he still looked at his friend and said, but not my guy. And like, yeah, you're a guy. Yeah, you're a religious leader. Yeah, you're a preacher. Whatever religion you are or grew up in or your neighbor is or whatever, you can type into Google that very religion and sex scandal and find one. I've never failed to find one within the past 12 months, right? Within the past year. So again, like, yeah, where is this happening? It's happening at institutions of power, at places of power that have no accountability. So politicians, places of power with no accountability, churches, places of power with no accountability, the capitalist ruling class, places of power with no accountability. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It's depressing. It's why I'm on team collapse, right? Like, burn it down. This isn't working. Um, yeah. So I don't have like a happy ending here because I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised. I'm a cynical optimist. I am always open to the idea that good things could happen, and I am skeptical that they will until we see evidence of it. And again, what are we seeing evidence of? A mass amount of information showing that the fantastical idea of a shadowy pedophile ring did exist, not in the way that the conspiracy theorists thought, but that the elites and powerful abuse land and their workers and the economy and everything else, and also children, because why would they stop at kids when they abuse everything else in their life? Um, we have mountains of evidence of this, and we have a ton of it that's redacted. Again, like Todd Blanche, who's Trump's buddy, his personal lawyer, who then got a position in the government to be an actual AG or whatever his is. I don't know if he's an AG. Um, these people are not credentialed to be doing what they're doing. Uh, but Todd Blanche said, like, we're not going to show anything that involves torture or murder. It's like, well, that means there's stuff that involves torture and murder. And the stuff that has been released that isn't redacted references that. So I don't know. His reputation will be tarnished after he dies because that's when people get more comfortable saying, "Oh, we never supported him." Um, but yeah, what a mess. You know, the idea that like they're not like us, except they're not like us, and we're not holding them accountable. So that's a bummer. This is who this is who, through no intention of his own, is going to tear it all down and break it, which I guess is nice. So there's our silver lining. The pedophile in chief is so bad at his job that we're in a roundabout way, we're going to get to burn it down because of how much stuff he's ruining, which is great. It needs to be ruined, preferably for somebody who had ethics and cared about what happens in the rebuild and not just the worst person ever. One of. So, all right. Well, this was fun. This is fun in the new setup. It's kind of exciting. If you're just listening, then not exciting. If you're watching, kind of exciting. Yeah. I don't know. I have like good stuff coming up, and I'm loath to talk about the things I do. It's my podcast, though. I'm supposed to, right? Plug your pluggables. I have a very exciting retreat coming up in Boston with a wonderful collaborator of mine, Emily Lopolis. We will be doing some trauma-informed yoga. We will be doing mindful movement. We'll be spending time in nature. We'll be grounding. We'll be doing all these things that help our nervous systems regulate while the world burns. Because again, even at the time of societal collapse, we still have to take care of ourselves, and we will continue to live until we die. And so, we got to take care of ourselves in the interim. So that's called Rest and Relax, a weekend for soft landings. You can find information about that on my website or Emily's website, which is iwtherapies.com. Get tickets for that. That is the first weekend in May, right outside of Boston. Lovely location, really cool stuff we've got going on. I'm also working with the Rights and Religious Freedom Foundation, which is RARF. I'm a fellowship member with them. So I have a project in mind that I am working on this calendar year to run a retreat specifically for insular religious group disaffiliates, people who have left high controlled religion. And so you'll hear more about me talking about that and posting about it and fundraising for it to be able to run a retreat that is specifically for survivors of high control religions, something that again can help settle their nervous system, something that helps them build community in a healthy, sustainable way instead of being victimized by groups of power again, like I talk about here, that the church protects the power and not the victims. And so building healthy community, resting and regulating the nervous system, again, that's just what I do. That is most of, if not all of my work, even in couples therapy, and working with specific populations where this is a thing. So that'll be coming later in the year, late summer, early fall, as I need time to fundraise for it. But I have some really cool stuff about that already. So you'll hear more about that. But again, I mean, there's community action to be taken. Call your elected officials and tell them to release the files, to defund and abolish ICE, to quit letting BlackRock buy up all the houses, to regulate AI. Whoever runs on prosecuting this regime to the fullest is going to get my vote. So, but there's community action, there's mutual aid, build your community, get to know your neighbors, organize for a general strike. That takes time and effort to be able to build to those steps. So if you don't feel like you're ready, there is somebody in your area who's already doing the work. Your work now is to find them and connect with them and figure out where you can go. But always action steps available. It takes everybody, right? That's what organizing and community building is all about. So take some action. It will be good for your brain. It'll make you feel better. I'm going to work and will work with clients after this. And that makes me feel better. It makes me feel like all the stress and anxiety and all the things that are coming up, I get to go somewhere with it. And so while structural change takes community building and organization, because a system has to change that structure, a group of people changes a system. On an individual basis, what's good for your mental health is to be finding some outlet to be able to take some action so that you can feel like you did something, and then you can put away the horrors of the world for a little bit until the following day. That was a little bit of sarcasm. Try not to do it every day. Yeesh. It's rough out there, y'all. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.